On the 21st of August 2007, one of the most iconic, pioneering and revolutionary games ever made was released, Bioshock, and with Bioshock 4 on the way, I couldn't resist diving deep into the underwater city of Rapture for the umpteenth time, and even by today's standards, it never ceases to amaze me. Just a quick warning for those who've never played it before: firstly, why the hell haven't you played Bioshock at least 4 times already? And secondly, there's going to be some seriously major story spoilers ahead, but I certainly won't be commenting on every single poignant moment in the game to the point where there's not even a point to play it again. So let's start with the setting Rapture. This monstrous underwater metropolis was constructed from the visionary mind of Andrew Ryan, who's an almost wannabe Walt Disney type character, attempting to conquer way more than any one man should even consider.
I am Andrew Ryan, and I'm here to ask you a question. Is a man not entitled to the sweat of his brow? No, says the man in Washington, it belongs to the poor. No, says the man in the Vatican, it belongs to God. No, says the man in Moscow, it belongs to everyone. I rejected those answers. Instead, I chose something different. I chose the impossible. I chose Rapture.
Andrew Ryan's attempts to eradicate any religious, political and social restrictions or limitations that were a byproduct in the aftermath of the Second World War may have felt fruitful at first, but Rapture eventually fell to its knees after the world's first ever underwater civil war. This was pretty much inevitable, with Ryan's intentions being to create an almost cartoonist, sadistic battleground for the strong to thrive and the weak to perish. Our first glimpse of his creation is the cherry on the cake of Rapture, the ominous lighthouse beacon and its bright light that glares at us, inviting us over to escape the struggles and the endless waves of the Atlantic Ocean after our story abruptly begins with our plane violently crash landing into the sea. But before we even get a chance to meet the wacky old nutjob Andrew Ryan, we're sapped of oxygen, clenched by the Atlantic's grasp, and at this point we can only guess who the man is behind this haunting lighthouse and whatever else could be waiting inside, or in this case, beneath. The world of Rapture is quite literally bursting at the seams thanks to its ongoing self-implosion, with some unforgettable imagery and what grew to become some of the most hauntingly iconic locations we've ever had the opportunity to explore in a game. One aspect of Bioshock that isn't touched on enough in my opinion is the genre in which most people categorise the game, as it most certainly is a first-person shooter with strong RPG elements, but it's the genre of horror that's a huge staple in Bioshock, and this goes far too easily unnoticed at times. The retro, futuristic, stylistic aesthetic delivers a constant and unsettling shadowy scene against the flickering neon lights, creating an amazingly harmonious blend of the setting which we can explore and the story that we're being told. This is a prime example of what developers Irrational Games achieved in creating Bioshock. We rarely leave the game's engine when playing, and virtually nothing is pre-rendered in a cutscene, meaning we are constantly tethered to the city of Rapture and the uniquely evocative feelings that it brings with it. From the very first moment we crash land and tread water on the fiery, oil-coated ocean surface approaching Rapture's front door, that mysterious lighthouse beacon, we're faced with an almost overwhelming amount of imaginative and foreign imagery that gives clues into the idea that this was all born from the mind of a madman. And then first setting eyes on the Art Deco designs decorated by intensely illuminating neon signs, to exploring the theatrically industrial architecture surrounding Andrew Ryan's office later into the game, and then to an almost welcoming, stunningly floral environment known as Arcadia, packed with the vivid wildlife and dramatic trees, providing the oxygen Rapture's population needs to breathe. These environments all still manage to wrap me up in this uncomfortable blanket, just warm enough to keep me exploring the wonders around me, but unnerving enough to keep my palms sweaty in anticipation as I progress through each area. There are so many more scenic moments moments that one playthrough was never going to be enough to absorb them all. And we can't forget that this was all achieved within what was at the time a fairly limited game engine, a low budget and a very small team of developers that were constantly looking for cheaper alternatives whilst maintaining a totally unique and atmospheric story that I will never forget. For example, the lead animator used his own daughter to film footage of the Little Sisters, which I'll get onto shortly, and the creative director voiced that creepy clown that advertises the Circus of Values vending machines himself. Another example of this is that the character Dr. Tenenbaum is actually the same character model asset as the Lady Smith model, because Irrational Games couldn't afford to create a new character model at the time, so to cover this up they creatively hid her behind a window of shadowy smoke in a noir effect, which just goes to show that creative ingenuity and imagination can always stand up against pure AAA technology. These are just a few examples of how low budgets can mean absolutely nothing when creative minds can paint a picture with more meaning, more depth, and a wider, more immersive vision than any technically driven developer that's been backed by a huge budget and is given top-of-the-range software that has endless capabilities. If you gave Van Gogh or Picasso an unsharpened pencil each, you can almost guarantee they'll produce something more mind-blowing than a team full of wannabe artists that, thanks to a huge funding behind them, have every artistic tool at their disposal but still can't manage to capture the imagination of an audience. Just because you have these technically advanced powerhouse gaming engines and finely tuned pieces of design software, one, it doesn't mean you should actually use them, and two, if you do choose to use them, it certainly doesn't make your game a good game necessarily. It may be a technical success and could possibly even be considered a cinematic success, but it's the creative mind that's poured their hearts and soul into a game that will always be top of my own personal list of favourite games. I think my only gripe with Rapture could be considered a compliment in a sense, because I felt a kind of frustration of isolation and even claustrophobia at times. My frustrations would peak even further when I'd look out through the glass into the eerily somber ocean, with my mind still trying to compute the fact that alongside the seaweed, fishes and bubbles that you might expect to see, but oh look, my brain's just short-circuited because there's a big dock-off underwater skyscraper over there. I felt this desperation to explore every inch of Rapture, which just isn't possible within the game's linear level design. This frustration though was born mainly from my own greed of wanting more Rapture, which to me is a good thing, because although it is linear, there are still plenty of secret rooms and hidden stashes to find, with well-hidden ventilation grids to crack open, crawl spaces to find, locked doors that either need a little electrical boost or even a well-hidden 4-digit code to be found. The city of Rapture has become overrun with the psychotic remnants of the remaining humans left in this underwater hellhole. Rapture's economy has dollars, just like Earth's surface does, but the most sought after currency is this chemical substance called Adam that's effectively the foundation to which Rapture was built on. Adam was used to genetically alter, or as Andrew Ryan might have you believe, enhance the humans of Rapture and give the population the ability to harness powers that are limited to their imaginations and quite literally bottled up in the form of plasmids and gene tonics to be sold from the variety of vending machines throughout the city. But thanks to the typical human nature we have and Adam's addictive properties, controlling the urges of such power without abusing it has come at a severe cost, leaving anyone who survived the addiction and self-abusive augmentations of their own genetic code in a very unstable, confused and often ferociously violent state of mind. What I love most about the Splicers, the main enemies in the game, is the fact that they weren't just bundled up as one enemy type and given some generic AI coding to run around their given areas within the city. It wasn't even the fact that they were split into different categories of Splicer, each with their own different attack styles, difficulty levels and mannerisms, which even at the time wasn't anything new. What genuinely did impress me though was that each Splicer I came across almost felt staged just for me, and I mean that in the best possible way, and I'm not just talking about one or two of them either. So many have been carefully considered for their role in each room that you'll walk in and every corridor that you'll walk down. There's rarely just a room full of Splicers just carelessly placed in there and don't worry, their crappy AI will tell them what to do. Instead, each encounter is terrifying because they've each got a very tiny role to play, whether that's listening into their disturbing little conversations with each other, their reactions to my presence, or their little coughs and splutters and haunting whistling of melodies to themselves, as they all seem so blissfully unaware of what twisted macabre creations they've actually become. Then there's the more action-orientated interactions with them, whether they're leaping out of a bathroom stall as you approach, witnessing a splicer couple slow dancing eerily on a dance floor, or just when you think you've got the game sussed as you approach a coffin with a corpse in it, because duh, obviously that corpse in that coffin is going to leap to life any second now and start wailing on me, but nope, some sneaky twat leaps out from behind the coffin and pushes it while screaming at me instead, making me almost hate Irrational Games for the absolute torture they're exposing me to, those sick bastards. Some may consider these to be cheap jump scares, and maybe they are, but in my first playthrough they had almost no predictability to them, catching me off guard pretty much every time, and that element of surprise was a constantly looming and growing pattern that I could never quite figure out or get used to. The gene splicing material Adam was originally extracted from these unique sea slugs found at the bottom of the ocean near Rapture, but one of the original scientists behind this gene altering creation, Dr. Tenenbaum, discovered that through experimentation not enough Adam could be extracted for valid scientific research. The method to plant these slugs into a little girl's stomach was eventually uncovered as the only viable method, because of course it was, and thanks to the little girls acting as the perfect host for these slugs, they could extract far more Adam to experiment on at a time, and this is how the Little Sisters were born, as a countermeasure to the ever-increasing shortage of Adam. Disturbing is an understatement. So from a gameplay perspective, Adam acts as a currency for us to spend at one of the vending machines around Rapture, this particular vending machine being known as the Gatherer's Garden, where we can purchase new plasmids and new slots to store them. The plasmids are bottled up concoctions of power we're given to creatively wreak havoc on the remaining mutated populace of Rapture. We start with the gift of the Electro Bolt, which is pretty self-explanatory, as are most of the plasmids to be honest, but the main 11 that we can unlock are such a delightful assortment of goodies for us to play around with. If you prefer to blitz those splicers to a crisp, launch them towards the ceiling just for shits and giggles, or if sending a splicer in the vertical direction isn't really your thing, then by all means catapult them flying backwards horizontally instead with my personal favourite, the Sonic Boom. You can freeze a splicer in an instant with Winter Blast, which is probably the easiest way to put an end to one of them, but it comes at a cost, as when you obliterate them into a crumbling mess of ice cubes, there's not exactly that much left to loot. There's plenty more to experiment with, and eventually picking your favourites becomes a necessary and viable option too, further upgrading the power behind each plasmid as we progress deeper into the game in collecting more and more Adam. It's not just plasmids that we can spend our hard-earned Adam on though, you can also purchase gene tonics which have a very nice variety of perk options to them, as well as health and Eve upgrades which really give us a huge customization options for our character. Eve, for those who are wondering, is the blue bar at the top corner beneath the health bar, which effectively acts as a stamina bar for your plasmids. Managing and juggling your loadout from weapon usage to plasmid usage is key at first, but as we slowly unlock more gene tonics that are categorized into physical tonics, combat tonics and engineering tonics, by the time we're approaching the end of the game we've gradually amounted quite a large list of game-changing perks that add so much replayability and player choice within the first playthrough, let alone the fact that you can take them all into a new game plus, strip them all out and go for a completely different playstyle the second time round. Adam is exclusive to a little sister and can only be collected from her, but getting to one of these little sisters to harvest some of her precious Adam means you've got to go through her protector, a big Daddy, a terrifying and menacing adversary in the game who has been spliced far more than the original splicers that we fight, and their once human bodies have been grafted into this intimidating steampunk inspired diving suit before they were genetically programmed to protect the little sisters and the Adam residing within them at all costs. The little sisters wander the hallways and half abandoned rooms of Rapture searching for dead splicers to harvest with a needle contraption that's similar to most most people's worst imaginable tool that you would ever want to see your dentist reach for when you're sat in the chair. Big daddies don't always have a little sister by their side though, so we can stalk them to these weird copper-mounted holes in the walls where they can knock on one to draw a little sister out. This mysterious hidey-hole transport system was built just for them throughout the city, giving them the freedom to move around from their orphanage and around the rest of Rapture. These big daddies are far from easy to take down though, and usually require a little pre-planning before going in all guns blazing. Planting mines or setting electrical tripwires and making sure you've got plenty of armor-piercing rounds is usually the key. Then comes the tricky moral conundrum as you stand over the corpse of a big daddy and a weeping little sister who's crying out in delusional despair because you've killed her big daddy. So, do you harvest the little sister for even more Adam, which will rip the slug from her stomach, killing her on the spot, or do you rescue her from her hypnotized mind state, returning her to the form of a normal little girl, and as a result you collect much less Adam? To counter this though, you're continuously rewarded by the geneticist behind the little sisters, Dr. Tenenbaum, who acts as their caring mother, who continuously pleads that you choose to rescue all of them and rewards you with the occasional teddy bear stuffed with some of that delicious pink Adamy goo that has caused all this fucking mess to begin with, to be honest. Your choice to rescue or harvest all comes down to how you perceive these little sisters. Do you see them as humans, which I think most players probably would do when playing through for the first time at least, or do you see them simply as a commodity to filling your vials with as much Adam as you can, you greedy bastards? Your choice will impact the 50-50 ending of the game too, so although the choices are somewhat obviously going to dictate a good versus bad ending, it's still a little disappointing that the reward for harvesting them wasn't that much greater than rescuing the little sisters. There was a difference, but I would have liked to have been a little bit more backed into a corner when deciding what to do with the little sister, because my moral code wasn't being tested as much as I would have liked. Considering rescuing them didn't really hinder me that much at all, I was still able to invest heavily into the gene tonics and plasmids that I wanted even after rescuing the little sisters, whereas harvesting them almost gave me the luxury of Adam, so much so that I was spending it for spending's sake. It was still nice to have some sense of choice though in a game which is ironically based around having no choice at all. You always have a choice, which brings me on to what I believe to be three of the most iconic words of dialogue ever used together in gaming history. Would you kindly? Throughout the game, we're directed by Atlas, the man who's been cut off from his family within Rapture and is desperately trying to rescue them from this crumbling, inevitably doomed underwater monstrosity of a city. This notion of a man trying to save his family is so pure and relatable for any sane thinking human and immediately makes him trustworthy. Throw in the calm and soothing Irish accent as he cooperates with you, purposefully helping you through Rapture as the help he supposedly needs and the help you'll receive in return consistently seems to be within reach. This all fuels the narrative behind Atlas and the idea that this man is on your side. I think anyone would be lying to themselves if they claimed that they were suspicious of Atlas on their first playthrough. Later into the game, as we shorten the distance between ourselves and the abnormity that is Andrew Ryan, it's revealed to us that throughout our entire journey through Rapture so far, Atlas has never actually been Atlas. He is in fact Mr. Frank Fontaine, the main threat to Andrew Ryan and Ryan Industries and the leader of Ryan's opposition in Rapture's power struggle. Fontaine is the head of a criminal empire attempting to capitalize on the value that's now been placed on Adam. This is the man whose actions have eventually led to the civil war that unraveled and the collapse in Rapture's society, pitting the desperate lower class citizens against the upper class citizens, leaving absolutely no room for them to even contemplate integrating with one another. Frank Fontaine has been playing his own hypnotic version of Simon Says, where at any time he, or rather Atlas, would say, "Would you kindly," just like a good little doggy, we followed the instructions of our master.
Would you kindly? Would you kindly get this? Would you kindly find that? Would you kindly find that? Would you kindly find? Would you kindly get this? Would you kindly? kindly head to Ryan's office and kill the son of a bitch.
We know so little about who we're playing as, other than that our name is Jack. We have a family and we were a passenger on a plane that's plummeted into the ocean, conveniently landing at Rapture's doorstep. Jack is nothing more than a genetically programmed tool with the illusion of real memories and a happy family planted into his mind from birth, all for the purpose of Frank Fontaine puppeteering you around Rapture, doing the dirty work on his behalf. For me, it's one of the most ingenious methods of disguising a rudimentary quest-giving instruction I've ever seen in a game. To choose those three simple words, which are easily perceived as a typical habit of phrase by anyone, going completely unnoticed, blew my tiny little 19-year-old brain at the first time of playing. When learning that the phrase "would you kindly" was a cognitive trigger to every action that I've played out in the entire game, it's the most brilliant approach, shamelessly highlighting the superficial choices that all developers claim that they give a gamer. But we never truly do have a choice though, do we? Those choices we're supposed to have already been decided for us, and so have their outcomes, but to integrate that lack of choice into the narrative was nothing short of fucking genius. There are so many other subtle nuances and systems of play within the game. There's the security systems and turning the tables within the combat by hacking the cameras or the mobile turrets to use to your advantage, and even have a little army of floating nuisances that can tear the Splicers to shreds in an instant. I did find these hacking mini-games to become a little mundane in the mid to late game area though, because you can even hack the vending machines that are placed around Rapture. Hacking these vending machines becomes irresistible as it unlocks extra items for purchase at even cheaper prices. I found myself hacking vending machines out of habit eventually, and sometimes short-circuiting and damaging my health, or even worse, triggering the security bots to hunt me down, causing all kinds of warfare, all for the sake of bagging myself a slightly cheaper cream-filled cake. These vending machines on the face of it are such a basic system, but it all plays into the theory and believability of Rapture as a world. How else would you unlock these gene tonics and plasmids, or make use of dollars to purchase health or even ammunition? What do you think is more believable in this world? Crazy talking vending machines that advertise themselves, dishing out the necessary goodies to make Rapture your own with an almost deranged looping dialogue, or some person that sat behind a shop store selling you exactly the same goodies, who sits there throughout the entirety of the game with their dialogue also being on a loop, in a world where everyone is hostile except for this shopkeeper, of course. So I definitely think they made the right call with the vending machines. Just when I thought the systems of plasmids and gene tonics were enough, we're given even more tactful systems to sink time into. We eventually unlock the research camera, which, as the name suggests, allows you to research enemies, unlocking specific bonuses when fighting them, and the quality of the photo, how close you are to unlocking each research bonus to use against that particular enemy. So there's a little risk and reward incentive for those who dare to get close enough and point a camera lens at a demented splicer for that epic shot. When crafting was introduced later into the game though, I genuinely couldn't believe it at first. On top of all the systems at play already, we're given the incentive to search for the necessary parts to craft exclusive ammunition types and automatic hacking tools at the you-invent vending machines. Not only that, the rarest and probably most sought after vending machine was the Power to the People weapon upgrade machine, giving us a one-time only upgrade to one of your weapons, really adding some noticeable differences in its power, as well as some genuinely cool physical cosmetic differences to the weapon that you've chosen to upgrade. Some of these latter systems I've mentioned have become a predictable main staple in so many games today, but this is the first time that I felt the need to remind you how old this game is, which in itself is pretty impressive. This was back in 2007. Go and find me a game that was released in 2007 or earlier that contains all of these narrative twists and turns, that also sits perfectly alongside these incredibly innovative gameplay systems and mechanics. There are no direct or obvious tutorials that break up the action either. There's no hand holding at all. It's all one seamless experience from start to finish, even though there are moments of clarity for the player to learn the game's mechanics and the systems at play, like Atlas screaming to hit them with the electricity before smacking them with a wrench, calling it the 1-2 punch, or even when we find and unlock a new plasmid, a little retro silent movie plays which almost acts as an advertisement for the plasmid, showcasing its abilities. These are all all believable methods of tutoring us without breaking up the real-time gameplay, keeping us within the narrative of plasmids that are being forced on people in an attempt to sell them like a retro cigarette advert. It's another seamless transition between the environment and a seed that's planted into the player's understanding of what exactly these plasmids do without narratively detracting from my commitment to believing that Rapture is a real place. Playing now for what I guess might be my 7th or 8th time now, I was fearful that the first person combat would feel a little dated considering the heights that the first person shooters can hit nowadays in the sensation that they give the player in games like Doom or games like Dishonored with its slick, fast-paced, two-handed action. It did feel a little dated in comparison to those two in fairness, but it surprisingly didn't feel that much worse at all. The left hand, right hand 1-2 punches, as Atlas puts it, are where Bioshock feels its most fun. Focusing on one weapon alone does feel a little watered down, and constantly sending a splicer flying around solely using my sonic boom plasmid didn't feel that much better either, to be honest, but the combination of your plasmid powers that sit on the left hand's fingertips and the wide variety of fantastically sounding and gratifying weapons to cycle through on my right hand feels so empowering. And I can't forget about the ammo types either, which add another enjoyable level of depth to the combat systems at play. It gave me so much choice in how to humiliate the demented splicers, and really no matter what style of plasmid and weapon combo I went for, I was never left feeling disappointed. The availability of the Evo links and the first aid kits was a constant reminder that both your left and right hand are of equal importance. The two biggest weak spots in the combat was firstly the zoom in aiming down the sight options, which was done by clicking the right stick. It feels sluggish, unresponsive, and it almost felt pointless, like it was tagged on as an afterthought to include a camera angle that's become second nature in most first-person shooters of today. The second weak spot in my opinion was the forgiving nature of the Vita chambers, because not every game needs that brutally punishing player death system, but the enemy's health wouldn't reset once I'd respawned in a Vita chamber, so I did feel kind of embarrassed knowing that the enemy that put me down was only one bullet away from death, as I shamelessly came crawling back to fight them. Other than those 2 points though, I was pleasantly surprised to see how well the combat is still holding up. The character design is pretty fascinating too, and is mostly a gaggle of fucked up lunatics who've been given the freedom to not only redesign society, but also what it is to be considered a human being. This is backed up perfectly by some impeccable voice acting, namely Andrew Ryan with his arrogant pomposity and confidence masking his utter insanity and the calming nature, as well as the trustworthy tone of Atlas as he pleads for your help before enacting one of the greatest backstabbing moments in gaming history. And without forgetting to mention the Splicers themselves and their insanely disturbing off-the-cuff comments, and even the retro contrapuntal music selection and the all-round haunting audio quality that is just another example of everything coming together so perfectly to create the most encompassing atmosphere I've ever experienced in a game. Then of course there's the little side notes in games that most commonly come in handwritten form, and I always lie to myself at the beginning of the game that I'm going to fully invest in this lore and read every single one, but halfway through the game I realise 90% of them add nothing to the overarching plot and are more often than not just mind-numbingly boring anecdotes that feel like some reference or some form of inside joke for only the developers to enjoy. Whereas in Bioshock, the audio logs found throughout Rapture are these constantly enriching additions to the narrative. There's a lot of them, and my frustration with them was how I'd sometimes stumble across another audio log before I'd even finished the last one, or even worse, being rudely interrupted by a splicer wanting to hack my face off. The writing is inspired and goes way beyond simply being lore friendly. It adds so much to the overarching narrative and connects the dots within the fiction, not only with the style in which these pieces of lore are delivered in a haunting fashion with faded radio crackling, but also listening to some incredibly disturbed characters vocalizing some of their innermost desires, fears, and just generally terrifying thoughts. I'll never stop to think when asking myself whether Bioshock is a masterpiece or not. It's without doubt one of the most revolutionary games ever made and comfortably sits as one of my favourite games of all time. It's an incredible blend of fast-paced, first-person shooter linear storytelling with in-depth RPG systems to upgrade your character in multiple ways, upgrade your weapons, and even crafting all the necessary tools to truly make Rapture your own. This 2007 classic is to me not only a pillar in gaming development, but an even stronger pillar in gaming creativity, artistic design, and overall passion for creating a unique experience for any player and a revolution in gaming, showcasing that we can truly have our cake and eat it.